at the proximal convoluted tubule, the major thing that happens is reabsorption. Most of the good stuff, a lot of the water, almost 99.9% of all the nutrients, amino acids, glucose, those kind of things, a lot of the ions, those things get reabsorbed up here. And the descending limb of the loop of Henle, what gets reabsorbed? Water, exactly. Because in the ascending limb of the loop of Henle, what gets pumped out? Sodium chloride. Yeah. Salt. Salt, yeah. You got it. All right. Okay, and then finally to the descending limb. Mainly secretion. Selective reabsorption. So if aldosterone is present, sodium is reabsorbed. If parathyroid hormone is present, calcium is reabsorbed. If water is if ADH is present, water is reabsorbed. So, sorry, diuretic hormone. So, selective reabsorption and secretion is what occurs at the distal convoluted tubule, mainly selective reabsorption. The distal convoluted tubule will reabsorb sodium and pee out or secrete potassium. So the important part of this is up until this point, right about through here, all of the stuff that's happening here is obligatory. It happens automatically. Regardless of what hormones are present, this stuff is going to happen. The hormones influence the last half of the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct.
So that's actually where the selective.
That's where the selective part comes in. Exactly.
Confused me a minute ago because you said that this convoluted tubule is selective for urinary.
Well, it's basically the second half of it and the collective.
First half, no.
The first half is basically obligatory. If the kidney tubules are healthy, all of this stuff is going to happen automatically. And so one of the things that I keep saying is the fact that the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct do the fine tuning on what the chemical constituency of the urine actually is. What exactly is going into the urine. All right. Yeah, okay, so your entire distal convoluted tubule co-transports your sodium and chloride ions. The distal part of it, the distal part of the distal convoluted tubule. The second, I know, isn't that awful? The second half of the distal convoluted tubule swaps sodium for potassium. And Emily, this gets back to what you were asking. The kidneys are set up to save sodium, pee out potassium. And it does this in response to aldosterone. Aldosterone tells your kidneys to do what? Reabsorb sodium. Aldosterone says reabsorb sodium. When the kidneys do that, and well, water follows it. When the kidneys reabsorb sodium, though, they're sucking in, they're putting back something positive into the bloodstream. So you need to get rid of something positive because you need to maintain that electrical neutrality. Just like the chloride shift in the red blood cells, and the bicarb came out, chloride went in. So you need to maintain that electrical neutrality. So if everything is working normally, if your sodium level begins to drop, say you sweat too much, you're doing a lot of sweating and your sodium level begins to drop, then aldosterone is going to be released. Kidneys will reabsorb sodium, but they will pump out potassium. So your entire distal convoluted tubule does this. It says sodium and chloride, it swaps this over here, and then this goes back in the blood and the potassium pees out. That happens automatically without the influence of aldosterone. The rest of it, though, the last part of it, if aldosterone is present, it does this in addition to this. Sodium is directly swapped for potassium. So, in the presence of aldosterone, you have an increased rate of sodium reabsorption over the baseline rate. And then you have an increased secretion or excretion of potassium. So another thing that can cause aldosterone to be released is if potassium level starts to get too high. If your potassium level starts to get too high, your heart's got to stop. That's how they kill people by lethal injection. They paralyze them and then they shoot them full of potassium. water stops. So if your potassium level gets too high, your body will release aldosterone so that you'll pee the excess potassium. So it could be two things going on. It could be a low sodium and or a high potassium. That will stimulate aldosterone. Now, what about hydrogen and bicarbonate? We're going to talk in a few minutes, I hope, about acid-base balance. Aldosterone is also involved in this. Your kidneys, just like your kidneys are normally set up to save sodium, pee out potassium, your kidneys are normally set up to save bicarbonate, pee out hydrogen. In the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct, you can swap sodium for hydrogen because they're both positive. You can swap bicarbonate for chloride. Carbon dioxide is going to come in. Carbon dioxide is going to combine with water to make carbonic acid. Right?
And then it's going to dissociate.
And then it's going to dissociate into the hydrogen ions and the bicarbonate ions. Bicarbonate, the hydrogen is going to get swapped for the sodium over here. The bicarbonate is going to get reabsorbed over here. So, here we go, for chloride. Swap the hydrogen. Yay! Remember when we talked about this in the red blood cell? Yeah. Carbon dioxide diffuses in, combines with water in the presence of what enzyme? Wait, what is this? No, this is that's carbonic acid. So the enzyme is called carbonic anhydrase. There we go. Okay. So the two places that you have that enzyme is inside your red blood cells and your kidney tubules. The kidneys can also excrete or secrete ammonia. If you're producing excess acids or excess ketones, diabetic ketoacidosis, uncontrolled diabetes. You're not making insulin, so you can't use your glucose. Essentially, you're going to pee out the glucose. So you start switching to fatty acids. And you use up all your fatty acids, and then you start breaking down amino acids. Right? So you're going to be producing some ammonia. When you start breaking down fatty acids, you can get excess acetyl-CoA. That's going to be converted into ketone bodies. And so if you're getting kind of in one of these weird disease states, what happens is your kidneys have to work extra hard. They deaminate the amino acid, the ammonia or ammonium ion gets secreted, and the bicarbonate gets reabsorbed to help neutralize these excess acids in ketone bodies. So by deaminating amino acids, the kidney tubules themselves, you're getting some extra bicarbonate. So in cases where you're eating a high-protein diet, or you're in diabetic ketoacidosis, or anything that's causing excess acid production in your body, your kidneys and the deaminated amino acids create a little extra bicarbonate to neutralize that. That gets swapped for that. Chloride gets excreted. The ammonium gets swapped. See, the chloride comes out. Now the ammonium is swapped for the sodium, which is nice because they're both positive, so it's okay. And then on the other side, you get the sodium swapped with the hydrogen. So by this mechanism, you're actually reabsorbing more sodium and bicarbonate and getting rid of ammonium and hydrogen. So it works out very nice. Your collecting duct. Again, the hormones come into play majorly right here. A little bit on the distal end. We talked about aldosterone on the distal end of the distal convoluted tubule. And then we're talking about the collecting duct. So aldosterone stimulates sodium reabsorption, potassium, and or hydrogen secretion. If you've got, in fact, one of the problems with having a low pH or an acidosis is your kidneys start pumping out hydrogen because they're trying to raise your pH back up, and all of a sudden your potassium starts to go up. So hydrogen balance and potassium balance are linked. ADH stimulates water reabsorption, and of course the natriuretic peptides, atrial and brain natriuretic peptide, do the opposite. All right, so sodium is swapped for potassium, bicarbonate is swapped for chloride. That's what's happening in this collecting duct. Again, aldosterone increases sodium reabsorption and potassium secretion. Bicarbonate gets reabsorbed in the collecting duct as well. And we talked about urea a little bit. Urea actually diffuses out of the collecting duct into the peritubular fluid, and it also contributes to that medullary concentration gradient. Remember, as you're moving from the top of the pyramid down to the tip, We talked about the fact that sodium and chloride are basically all this fluid. The tubular fluid, the peritubular fluid, all of that gets more concentrated. And so if you've got urea diffusing out of this as well, that makes it even more concentrated. If the blood pH begins to drop for whatever reason, then that means the fluid around the tubules the pH begins to drop. And so hydrogens are going to be sucked out of this fluid, put into the tubule, and peed out. Bicarbonates are going to be reabsorbed. If the blood pH goes up, bicarbonate is going to be peed out, and hydrogen is going to be reabsorbed. So the kidneys are extremely important in maintaining blood pH. Obligatory water reabsorption. Proximal convoluted tubule is going to have to be via osmosis. The descending limb of the loop of Henle is going to be via osmosis. Of course, no water is going to be absorbed from this side because the ascending limb is impermeable to water. Then in the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct, because sodium is being reabsorbed, water follows the sodium. Now, facultative or assisted water reabsorption. This is where ADH comes into play. At the distal end of the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct. In the presence of ADH, you get aquaporins. And because of this medullary concentration gradient, water is sucked out of the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct. Additional water. Only if ADH is present. Because what ADH does, ADH is released by the posterior pituitary, goes into the bloodstream, goes down to the kidneys and says, suck out the water. It says to these cells have the receptors for that hormone. ADH binds to the receptor, the little nucleus says, okay, make some aquaporins and put them in the membrane, and then water gets released. So ADH is going to be released. I think we said 3 in your big chart, 3 characteristics. If your blood osmolality got too high, you got dehydrated. Your blood pressure dropped, or if there was angiotensin II circulating. Right? Right. Trigger, those are the 3 stimuli that will cause the pituitary gland to release ADH. If your blood pressure is high or your blood concentration is low, you're well hydrated. Then ADH is not released. There aren't many water channels, so most of the water, whatever water remains in here, is going to stay in here, and you're going to produce a large amount of urine, but it's going to be dilute. If your blood pressure is low or your blood concentration is high, you're dehydrated. Then ADH is going to be present. You're going to have lots of water channels in here. Most of this water that gets down to this point is going to get reabsorbed, so you produce a small amount of concentrated urine. Because you have, here's the glomerulus, here's the proximal convoluted tubule, descending limb of loop of Henle, ascending limb of loop of Henle. Remember that 50% of your nephrons are juxtamedullary nephrons. They have the long loops of Henle. Most of your nephrons are corporal nephrons. They're basically, their important function is going on in the proximal convoluted tubule and the distal convoluted tubule. But those 15%, those juxtamedullary nephrons, have those long loops of Henle. And then we talk about these special peritubular capillaries called Vasa recta. And so as water is being reabsorbed here, and sodium chloride is being reabsorbed here, you've got the Vasa recta that are functioning to maintain that medullary concentration gradient. Without the Vasa recta, the water and the sodium chloride would eventually diffuse across and everything would be the same concentration. The tubular fluid is going this direction, right? Right? The blood is going the opposite direction. So, some of the sodium chloride is going to be sucked out over here. It's going to come around the blood, and that's going to help the blood suck some of the water out over here. So you always end up with water being removed on one side, sodium chloride being removed on the other, and so they don't have time to diffuse across and balance each other out. So really, you've got two countercurrent mechanisms going on. You've got the countercurrent of the tubule, the move of Henle, and you've got the countercurrent of the vasorectal.